Welcome to a new series I'm doing on exploring some of the what might have been, what could have been with games, but not necessarily just rehashing the same old lines from the game that have been debated over and over again, but really going the extra mile to take the best tools available to us now thanks to modders in the community in order to really try and take a scientific look at what is there in the game, what does it really mean, is there anything to support some of these theories that people have debated for years and years and years because of a texture on a wall or a door that acted funny or something like that. So we're just going to go through those doors and go on the other side of those walls and see what we find there, and also explore some of the content found on the disk through data mining methods if needed, but oftentimes it's very easy to access. Now, this is something that I started doing a long time ago, back when I was a kid. And the reason for this is, well, back in my day, before the internet, there were all sorts of schoolyard rumors that would go around. Kids would come up with all sorts of BS stories about what they had done, and everything from Mega Man to Mortal Kombat. And pretty much the peak of this was when I was 13 years old and The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time came out on the Nintendo 64. And that game, let's just say it was the game that launched 1,000 rumors. There were kids saying that they found the Triforce, that they went to the Unicorn Fountain, and the one that drove me the most insane, now let's call this kid Lion Timmy Perkins. Now that is of course a made-up name, but this is the kid that was always telling the lies, like, oh, there's a code to make Sonya Blade naked in Mortal Kombat. Like, come on, Timmy, come on. It wouldn't even be rated mature then. It'd be rated whatever's above mature at that time. But anyway, this kid would always tell the tallest tales about what he'd done in the game before, and he just, claimed up and down that he had beat the Running Man in The Legend of Zelda 64. And it just, oh boy, it drove me crazy, because of course you can only have done it this one time when he was at home in the zone, and you don't get an item or anything for it. It just, the Running Man pats you on the back and that's it, so we had to take his word for it. So this is what caused me to become an early adopter of the Game Shark and tear through my copy of the game and just be like, listen, Timmy, you lying sack of crap, there are no other options in this game for anything else happening in this encounter, like, period. There are no other lines of dialogue, there are no other, things that could happen, there are no further branches, and everybody was looking at me like, what the hell are you talking about? And I was a nerd among the nerds from that moment on. But also, I was just not going to listen to someone else's speculation about what could be inside my favorite game, so I've always taken it upon myself to poke in there, tear it apart, give it a good shake, and see what's inside. So now we're going to do that with Demon Souls to start out the Souls series. I already did kind of a low-budget pilot episode on Evergrace, which I view as kind of like the beta Souls. But we're going to explore the first game in the series here, and this first video is just going to be from going out of bounds within areas in the game and speculating about some things that could have been in the earlier development vision for the game, including more overtly explaining how the map is connected and where regions in the world exist, rather than making the lore so vague, as is a large part of the appeal in the games. But you definitely get the impression at several points that it once might have been explained more what the world was like. So without much further ado, let's get into it. Starting right from the tutorial, there's some pretty interesting things to see already, but there's not too much right outside the starting area. There's nothing behind you if you were to just walk back through the wall that you start in front of. The only really interesting thing out here is this object, which actually seems to be a bunch of boxes full of dirt, all slightly a few degrees off from each other in a radial pattern. It does actually have collision physics, but other than that, I don't see why it's out here, because I don't think this object is anywhere in the level proper. Not much else going on around this first area. There's mostly just what you see here. Now there are a few other interesting placeholder objects. If I run up here to get a little bit higher, excuse me a moment, you can see this little ledge here off to the side where you jump down into the courtyard. If we go the opposite way from where you drop down, you can kind of see there's just a little ledge here with the water flowing off to what the normal water table is of the level. You can see the ocean going off into the distance. Now there is an odd bugged message out here, and I don't know if this is just a placeholder message for the area, or if it, you know, why it's out here, but it's just randomly out here. There's also a corpse over in that rock that's just sitting there. Now these could just be objects that are loaded in at some point, that they wanted to have it handy to load it in quicker, but it also could just be stuff that people forgot out here. There's not a whole lot out here besides that, but one of the most interesting things is the tower section and the courtyard area are not actually connected. In a lot of areas, you can go from archstone to archstone and get the different chunks to load in, but these are actually separate areas it warps you into. But it looks like they originally were going to have you climb all the way up into the tower from the courtyard. And I guess they decided that a 2-hour-long tutorial was a bit much, even for Demon Souls. So they just cut it down and you explore a small area in the courtyard. Then you warp up inside what presumably is this tower, and you can see a long shaft that you can fall down into and die. That looks like it's this tower here. But other than that, it's just mostly detail objects for you to see from down below to suggest that you're going up into the tower. There's nothing else inside here except these tunnels here, which have collision, as in you can walk in them without falling through the ground, and they go in here. So at one point, I guess they were going to continue the level and you were going to have to keep trekking up there manually, but then I guess they just decided to cut it short. There's nothing else inside here besides just these dead ends of all of these cut off hallways you can see coming in here. But it's interesting, they don't just go straight as if they were to be detail. If you go past this, there's a ramp going upwards. So it was actually intended to go into the keep. Otherwise it would just stop right here and there'd be no reason to have it go upwards in elevation like this. But as you can see, I go here, it totally dead ends. There's not any deleted collision or anything left in here that'll cause me to glitch out. Any other suggestion that they made it any farther than this, or they just hard cut off whatever else was in here and thoroughly removed it from the game, so it doesn't even crash the game trying to load it. Now, if we go off towards this is interesting. I had at first thought that this was supposed to be like a ringed wall that had once been around this island or peninsula or whatever this is. But it actually looks more like it's a long bridge connecting to the mainland. So if this is either an island or some sort of peninsula, this was some sort of bridge connecting to this other landmass that we can see in the skybox. Now, it could just, you know, be interesting stuff to see over the wall in that one section where you get up on the wall and drop into the courtyard. But it's going to come into the brief 2 seconds of map that was shown in the intro that I'm going to talk about a whole crazy theory about the world layout in Demon Souls based on these things. But this long bridge connecting to an island is significant. Now we get over here and it just kind of falls off the water table into space. The skybox is the edge of the level. There's not much beyond it. There's nothing to see beyond it. There's not much you can walk even beyond the skybox. So all of this stuff is just perspective objects to be seen from the gameplay area. But it is interesting. Every detail, in my opinion, means something in the Souls games just because of what we know about how the development was done. And a lot of things that I'll show you of how obsessive to detail they were for even players that just peered way off into the distance. So speaking of that, I'm going to show off the skyboxes in a lot of these areas. This one, it's fairly generic. It's just a dome skybox like in a lot of the areas. But it does have 2 layers here. For this landmass is 1, and then there's the actual skybox itself behind it. Going in here, one thing that I was always curious about here in the second part of the tutorial is if you look through this grate, it just looks like there's a fog door over there. And I always thought, a fog door? Wow, that's crazy. That must mean there was a whole other section. But it's an optical illusion. You're actually just seeing gray skybox. And this does look like an external door. Like this could be a connection to that outer area. But it's totally just cut off. Now, an interesting thing about it, though, is there is collision in here, and part of this room has a stairwell that actually goes up and connects to, there's an entire floor that actually seems to have been removed from this area, and you can see a number of cut off stairways and doors and things like that going to it, but all of the data for it has been removed, and that'll cause what I just call a soft crash or a float crash. But you'll see what happens. My character model basically disappears, like I'm obscured inside something, but it's just because the game can't find what how I'm supposed to react, what physics reaction, the sounds, so on and so forth. It's trying to load stuff and can't find it. And when that happens, you can just see the glow of my Augite of Guidance like through a wall. And you can see up here, this is part of an actual gameplay area that's just not loaded in where that torch is. And it connects to this section of the castle that I'm not able to get into. So I'm trying to find something that I can walk on, because setting foot in an area is what causes it to load in. So I was just hoping that there was something that wouldn't cause this to happen. But unfortunately, I walked into the area that's not allowed, and that's what happens. Another one is there's a blocked off gate in the very next room from where you start. Now, it's interesting because you can see that it did go upward and connect again to this upper floor that's deleted, but it just ends right there and you can see the skybox again. Now, if I step past this first landing, I will have that same thing will happen to me again, and I'll get stuck. So I just walked through the wall and came over. Here's another area, this destroyed stairwell. This leads into a hallway that's still partially visible as part of this floor that's missing. Now, if you step inside this hallway at all, you get the float glitch. So I tried to kind of poke around it at the edge, and you can see just little bits of this area. Like you can see that from those stairs down below. You can see up through this hole in the floor. That's actually gameplay area below that floor. And then that hallway down below is where I start. But unfortunately, every time I get too close, that happens. So going to the final area, this is a cool one because it just invites a ton of speculation. Right at the beginning, if we turn around and go backwards out of the Dragon God's boss fight, I'll call it, there's a little tunnel as if this had connected rather than taking us through an archstone. So maybe this actually would have connected and this was somewhere in that same landmass. It seems like a totally bespoke room, but who knows on that one. There is a tiny connecting tunnel, but it doesn't really go any further, and there's no collision or anything that seems to have been deleted out of there. It just dead ends. So we get out here to our buddy. Now this guy is the center of a lot of what I talked about in the intro. People talking about a bunch of nonsense about how there's some way you can kill this guy. And most of it centers around these ballista that you can just barely see if you peek through that gate and don't walk through yet and get one punch man to death. People say, oh, you can activate those, you just have to dodge his cinematic and blah-de-blah-de-blah. Well, take a look at this, you lying little Timmy Perkins. Here's me trying to activate it in pretty much every way I can think of. Now there's nothing there. I tried hitting it in case there was a collision activation for it at one time and they changed it. I tried just about everything. No, these are only here to give you false hope. And this is what inevitably happens. Kaboom. Now this is just an event that is triggered by this cinema. As you'll see here, actually, it is possible to kill him, but not by force of arms. He actually does make a collision sound if you get it just right, but his health doesn't go down. He is flagged to not take damage or anything like that. So no matter what you do, you cannot activate those ballista. You can come out here and whack on him for hours. It won't kill him. But there's a couple ways you can do it. You can death ragdoll him, and he'll just play his death animation and fall down into the lava, which, well, it really makes him what you'd think a non-issue. But even so, and no matter what condition you were in, it will still play that cinematic. Now this is funny. I wanted to test killing him to see if it would trigger the animation, and I also put myself in spirit form, just to try as many things as I could to see what it would do. It does make a sound effect as if you'd killed a major demon, but you don't get any souls. If you're dead, it doesn't revive you from spirit form. And even after he's dead and his model is deleted from the level, yep, still plays this animation where he punches you even if you're in spirit form. So, I mean, you can look at the code for the event, but it's just an event that plays when you walk onto that section. But, nice thing is, we can turn off events. We can also turn off enemies. Unfortunately, I turned off enemies after I went into the level, so you're going to have to hear screaming a bit. This is one of those bugs I talked about that was just from me being tired and recording hours and hours of this footage. But, you can see there's no collision at all over here. A lot of people have been curious if there's, if it ever seemed like it could be gameplay area. And once again, if it's not to scale or doesn't have collision and there's no signs of anything being removed, it probably was never intended to be gameplay. It's just to show that this bridge was destroyed by our angry buddy here, and there's all this debris where it was destroyed in the middle. It's here to look cool. My theory really, honestly, is that they just threw this together. The tutorial appears to be the last area created. It's number 8. And they just wanted to have a laugh at you dying. Oh, you think you beat the tutorial? Yeah, right. So these statues look pretty cool. There's some architecture in here that doesn't exactly match anything else in the game. So they did actually put a fair amount of effort into making a really cool area for you to explore here if you looked around out the windows and stuff and really kind of poked at it. But you were never intended to get any further than his giant fist of death. But, you know, just to give a closer look at it. Now, there is a little bit of a trick here. A couple of those lava flows have collision and you can walk on them, but I think it's just because somebody accidentally coded them as hard surfaces. And it's not intentional. It's just a few random places up there on that hill. If you run on the lava flow, it's solid and you'll actually go upwards. You see right here, I go upwards for a moment and then I'll go through in the next section. So there was collision on that section of lava. But, I mean, that's not what I'm talking about when there's a bunch of collision out in space that suggests there was another room that was removed. Just to give a look underneath, there's nothing underneath there. To go out here and run and look at the skybox, it's pretty generic. It's just mountains all around. Now, there are a lot of skyboxes in this game that suggest stuff to me, but this one, I think it was just for scenery. Running through the skybox to take a look at the other side, it's just another basic dome. It looks pretty cool, and then a really interesting thing about it is it resembles the sky in one of the images in the intro. I did test here because the sun is actually at the same level as the player, which is not the case in any other level. I tried to run to it, and it's just an effect. No matter how far you run, the sun is always the same distance away. So, yeah, you know, I did not reach the sun, but I did reach the edge of the level as far as it would let me walk. So my coordinates weren't changing anymore, and I decided it was time to just accept that Mama told me not to look into the eyes of the sun. Here we are in the good old Nexus, our nice calming respite from the endless violence and death of the world of demon souls. Now, this is an area that people have wondered a lot about. And one of the first areas is this, that it's, you know, in the game, it's ostensibly a hallway where there are a bunch of tutorial messages to explain things to you. But just by the layout, people have wondered, is there anything on the other side of it? Was this originally connecting to something, like a big gate in or out of this building? Well, yes or no. There's not much out here. There's very little to see. But very interestingly, again, if we walk right to the edge on the immediate side of the wall, boom. Game's trying to find something that it can't. So it is actually possible that there was more than just that wall. But all I get is that, so wasn't anything to explore there. Now, another one is, can you actually get to the old one area by just falling through the floor? No, unfortunately. And big problem, the old one area is the only thing that's going to be missing from this video. Sorry, spoiler. Because using the debug mode, it crashed every time I tried to load it, either by triggering the event, by just going there manually, like going through the floor like this, trying everything that I could, including going and just killing the bosses. Didn't work. So, not only can you not fall there directly, it doesn't load it no matter how far you fall. There doesn't seem to be anywhere for me to get there with the debug. So in a future video, in the part 2, I would really like to do that. Unfortunately though, no, it's just, it keeps loading sections as you fall down while it plays that cinematic where the Candle Maiden is talking to you. So I decided to go out of bounds a little more and look around and just see at some of the other heights what there was. I looked inside the Broken Archstone, no, nothing interesting there. I don't know why I thought there would be, but yeah, it's what it appears to be, and I didn't find any unusual collision about it. Its object closely matches its collision. Didn't find any real hidden rooms or anything out here. It's mostly just how that pit works, where it just seems to it loads as many segments of that as it needs to while you're talking to the Maiden in Black. But other than that, there's not anything really exciting about it. It is a separate area it loads you into. The Old Ones area where you meet... Well, you know what? I should not do plot spoilers. So anyway, I hopped in and out a number of times, just looking for any other hidden collision, and I didn't really find anything. There are a few interesting things just to kind of see about how the area is constructed. Now that's the lower area that I'm seeing and all the torches. It just looks kind of neat looking at it through the wall without the collision loaded. It's like 100 players that are stuck in the float glitch. Don't, you know, be deceived into thinking it's deleted areas or anything like that. That is just that lower area and the hallway with all the tutorial messages visible from above here. And the geometry and the textures of the, you know, it's all unloaded down below. So finally coming up here to the Hall of Champions, I just want to kind of look around it and see if there was anything interesting. I didn't find anything out of bounds. One thing I was curious about is that, you know, when you're running around, you can tell that it's not a full circuit you can run in this hallway. And so I wanted to investigate that and also look around that shaft coming in the top of the building where the light comes in. And well, I gotta say there wasn't really anything to find. It's just a shaft with light shafts coming in. There's no sun object or anything in this level, just those light shaft objects. And as far as there being anything else in the area you can't get to, besides me being stuck here in this slope floor, I tried to see if I could run up that slope, but it doesn't have proper collision. Ah, Boletaria, land of fire-breathing dragons, an army of soul-starved maniacs, and a king who decided without consulting them that his people would probably be happier if they were dead. So, you know, why not go on about helping them? Yeah, hell with that, man. I'm out of here. So let's say that you could just go right back out through the front gate of Boletaria and make your way right back on out of this land and look for that fissure that you supposedly came through. Now there's no collision. You'll immediately fall through the ground if you don't have gravity turned off, as I do here. But there is this neat little canyon that you know, supposedly would come through if you came through on foot or by horse or carriage into Boletaria. And it does go out for a bit. There's no collision on any of this. I would just go right through it and fall through the ground if I didn't have gravity off. And eventually we even run out of ground. But this is one of those interesting ones of just, you know, in case a player somehow managed to peek through that gate a little bit, they put this out here so that you would see that there was indeed something leading in. I don't think it's likely that there was ever any gameplay because there's nothing else out there. Now, once we get out here, a really cool thing about this area is the skybox is really well designed to actually look like a wall of the colorless fog as described in the lore. And the illusion holds up pretty well until you get extremely close to it. It's just the way it's designed. It looks like it's moving even when in a way that it isn't. It looks like it has this sort of amorphia effect that looks very cool, and it's just neat that someone put a lot of thought into that about really making it feel like there was a wall of fog around Boletaria. There doesn't seem to be around the other levels, but at least here the skybox has a really cool effect in that way. Now if you do just run right through it, you can see it is a globe like in all the other areas. And we have our sun here. It's, well, it's impossible to tell, honestly, if it's morning or afternoon. So getting any sort of geography from Boletaria based on that is not really possible. But it's just kind of cool. You can look back and see what the level looks like inside the globe of the skybox. And the way the skybox was designed is neat. Now, one thing that I'm always, you know, just interested about is like, where do things go just out of sight? So these rivers, they just dead end. You can see that's other sections of the level. That spire is visible through all sections of the first area. But these just dead end on each side. Now, we are able to speculate a little bit based on these rivers later, based on images shown in the intro movie. For now, though, there's not really much else to talk about those, besides that they dead end just out of sight. You can see a little bit of that canyon that I would supposedly come into Boletaria through. So going back here, another thing that really interests me is seeing how well things connect, how well it's laid out. And in this case, the drainage tunnel that's below the execution grounds, supposedly where the bodies are just dumped out into the river, it does actually connect pretty well. Now this is an interesting thing. What in the world is this? And turn the brightness up so I can see better. Now this strange looking object is one of the kinds of things that I'll mention that makes people think. You can get any number of ideas if you don't recognize it for what it is, which is a placeholder. This is the placeholder for the phalanx. This is what actually shoots the spear out in the cutscene you see, is this strange object which I call Long Dong Ulan, which is sort of a lore joke about the phalanx. But it's a character model of one of the corpses inside a block with a spear sticking out the bottom. Now, here's probably something that people have speculated about the most in Boletaria. There is what appears to be a town. I call it Parish Town because of the church here. It is actually shown in the intro movie in some of the art. Now, don't worry, I'm going to come back and I'm going to run through it on ground level and we'll get a much better look. But for right now, I'm starting from the far end of the valley so we can see some other stuff. I will come back, though, and you're going to get the best look you've probably seen yet at this town. Now, we go out here, and it's interesting. There are these roads that come out of the city. And if we look, another thing that's neat is this lake. This lake has a really cool reflection texture that it looks really good from a distance. Now it obviously breaks down when you get over here, which shows us that anything that is obviously perspective is not intended to be gameplay area. So not only is stuff not to scale, as you can see, this little whatever waypoint at the fork of the road is much smaller than me, so we've clearly left scale behind. These roads are pretty interesting though. Basing on just some of the stuff in the intro and other things, this one obviously goes back to Boletaria proper. But the other one, going off towards the mountains, well, this leads us to speculate on some things based on this lake, the map that's shown to us briefly, and something that we see in the skybox and a few things in Stonefang, which I don't want to talk too much about that before I get there. But we can kind of start to put together some of the geography of the world that was completely removed from references within the game. But I will get into that more in a later segment. Now, coming back through what I call Parish Town, again, it's not at scale. Now we're at about what I would estimate is maybe 60% scale. These buildings are pretty small. I'm not a giant, or the Debug character is not a giant. This is just the Debug mode character, by the way. This is not some character I created. But these buildings would not be, maybe not quite twice this size, but they're clearly scaled down. So it's, you know, anything that's scaled down is just meant to be viewed from another area. It is neat though. There's layout, there's thought. There was a lot of effort put into this, and you get the sense that the directive that came down throughout the development of Demon Souls was if a player could turn the brightness all the way up, have a huge projector screen on the wall, and squint at it really hard and see it in the distance, it had to look convincing. And that kind of carries through a lot of stuff in this game. So it's easy to deceive players into thinking that these could have been gameplay areas when you investigate them, there's not evidence to show that. But it also shows, it leads us to things we can kind of surmise about the lore and goals that they may have had at one point in development of what the world would have been like and what its scope could have been. So it is interesting in that aspect that a lot of these things seem to adhere to whatever their original design document was going to be when the world had a world map, and there was more of an overt suggestion of how the areas connected to each other and where everything was located. Coming on our way back, it is neat how these streets, you can run along them. I mean, buildings wouldn't be quite this crooked in any normal town, but it is laid out with streets and in a sensible way. There are just a few buildings down here at the base of this is the Lord's Path and 1-2, and they're also not to scale. They're about the same as the town here. But there's one path here that goes back up to 1-1, so, you know, presumably to the front gate area, and one that comes up here to the Lord's Path. So this was, whatever this was some sort of settlement that was a suburb of Boletaria that you would think maybe is referenced, could have been referenced somewhere, and has some relevance, I guess I'm saying, because it is so visible, and there's clearly so much thought that was put into its layout down here. Now when you get here, besides that there seems to be somewhat of a crease in the hillside, this path dead ends at the base, and there's no suggestion of it going up. There's not really a gate up there in the Lord's Path where it would have come down here or anything like that. But you can see that that's where people would have gone, and it's doubtful that they would have climbed up the mountain. So the thought of whoever designed this area is that this sort of suburb was connected. Now, one of the most interesting things about Boletaria is you get this really cool vantage at the end from fighting False King Alant. And there's a lot of stuff you can see out here, and there's a lot of things to speculate about from beyond this. But just first of all, these towers up here right near where the boss battle is are empty. And this area immediately below is not actually a lower detail model of the area you've just cleared through. It swaps it right when you go up the elevator. So you can see the dragon and the areas, but all of this stuff below me, and I'm going to show this from a few areas, or a few angles, I mean. This is designed to be a perspective view for you to feel like you're looking down at the area you conquered. But when you look at it from other angles, you can see like the gaps below me of where it only is convincing from one side. So although it seems at times like the Souls games scale down the entire world to lower LOD models in the distance, that's not actually the case. It is almost always something that was designed bespoke for the viewpoint you're seeing it from, that may use chunks of lower detail models of the areas, but it is actually just made for that view to convince you at that time. Now another thing is you can just kind of see out the windows of the elevator that there's some land back here behind the castle. And what's out here? Well, not really anything all that interesting. It's just sort of generic ground texture back here so that there's something there if you briefly glimpse out those windows in the elevator shaft. Now there's no backside whatsoever to the castle. It's just the elevator going up to the boss room and then the things that you can see if you stand where Allant was standing and look down over, well, I guess what's not his domain anymore. And you could basically look at the areas that you've conquered throughout the game. So going out here and looking down at these, they are fairly high detail, but the thing about it is that there just don't seem to be lower detail versions of a lot of this stuff, and there's not much going on in this area besides the boss battle, so they just put tons and tons of it out here, and it doesn't seem to slow the game down to have tons of geometry for you to see when you're looking around. Now, this wouldn't be interesting. You would just assume that this was random geometry put out here, except for the obsessiveness that is shown in the development of this game throughout. So it's not likely that even the layout of these hills and what you can see here is random or thoughtless. It's quite likely that this is meant to represent lore-wise what the actual geography around Boletaria would look like. And so we see that there's a mountainous region. There is a valley over towards where the lake is in 1-2 and sort of the area where we come in from. But there's a higher area here over on what... It's difficult to describe what direction everything is in, but going on just an assumption that the front wall of Boletaria faces south, which is suggested by a few other things that I'll get to later, then this would be off to the west. So the concept that there's this western highlands, Boletaria is situated in the mountains, and it's a small valley that it seems to be inside of. And then the geography seems to get higher and move up towards a large plateau on that side. So it could be that it immediately, it's a nearby region, and that there's a high plateau off to the side of the mountains that Boletaria is located inside of. But that's entirely speculation, just based on that there is a large plateau and a bunch of mountains off in that direction. In this brief part, this is the only time it loads this geography. Now, I wanted to go all the way back from the area, like as if I was walking into Boletaria, and that's what I was just doing now. So the level of the ground and everything doesn't match up. It's just a low detail thing to be seen from that boss battle area, and it immediately disappeared when I loaded this chunk in. Stonefang is an area that had more than I expected, actually. So just from the beginning, because it's easiest to go from top to bottom when I'm using this method to explore, I want to check out this tower over here that's very visible from the starting area of Stonefang Tunnel. So, while it looks very cool, once you get up close to it, you can see that it only has textures on one side. So it's not, that was clearly just meant to be seen from there. But it does start to get interesting. If I go over to the other side of this destroyed walkway here, I was just kind of curious what was over here. And then I noticed that when I looked down that canyon that's only visible if you're on this side of it, there were some trees visible. So it's like, okay, why would there be trees visible down a canyon where you're not supposed to go? So I started running off in the direction, okay, where would the road have gone that came through there and is then destroyed leading into Stonefang? And I ran over here and look at this. I found what to me looks like a man-made wall in the skybox directly out the end of that road. So I thought that looked like the edge of the Boletarian Kingdom, which would suggest some things to us about the geography. And further, we're going to go and explore this valley off in the other direction from Stonefang that, combined with that idea, could mean a lot. Now, there's one other thing I forgot to mention because I didn't get it to load in there. I didn't drop on top of it. But there's a carriage hanging off the side of the destroyed bridge. And it is the same type of carriage that is in the Boletarian Palace area. So that's just a little piece of evidence for you. It's actually visible in another stream I did, that leads to Boletaria. Now, we have this valley over here that has this large castle keep in the foreground, which the most interesting thing about that is it actually blocks view of a lot of this other stuff. There's not anywhere within the gameplay area that you can see some of this stuff, yet it has a fair amount of detail, which is kind of interesting. And again, this stuff is at that sort of somewhere between 50 and 75% scale. So it's not ever intended to be gameplay area, but does have a lot of detail as if it's supposed to have meaning. One thing that is impossible to see, mostly because it's obscured by rocks, is that this river forks at the end of this valley. It comes out of the mountain, which is mostly invisible right now, where the level of Stonefang is, and then it comes to the end of this valley and forks, and that's going to be very important in our map discussion later. So there's this kind of interesting temple with this big obelisk pyramid at the end that it looks cool. I guess that's all I can really say about it. And so I ran around and looked there. There's nothing inside. These are just low detail buildings, but it is pretty large and impressive. So because this is one of my favorite things to do, is try to make it feel like I'm actually playing when I'm out of bounds. So here I've done as best as I could to sort of stay at level so that it seems as though I'm running along the ground in this out of bounds area to see what it would look like if this were a gameplay playable area. So I'm going to mostly stay quiet and just point out a few things and let you kind of enjoy this. There are destroyed bridges in front of a number of these forts, which is kind of curious to me. That suggests a siege, and destroying bridges as an opposing force came up this river valley. One interesting thing to note quickly about the sun is if time is frozen within Boletaria as suggested in the lore, and that includes this area in Stonefang as well, if the sun is in the same position in both and we assume my directions, then it means that it is currently frozen in afternoon, late afternoon, as the sun is in that position in both maps, if that is the west. Though I guess when talking about the sun, that assumes that this planet is similar to Earth, but let's not even get into that and just kind of figure that the game developers had that same bias. Now over here, this is where the base of the mountain would be. It's not visible because it's not visible from the gameplay area. Once again, this just shows you that this stuff is all intended to be seen from the gameplay area because they didn't bother at all with anything that is outside of the player's view. I've hit a solid object, which means this is the foot of the mountain, and I'm working my way into the gameplay area, and I'm going to pop into one of the later segments of Stonefang. And here we are. Now I ran around a bunch in this area, but I didn't actually find anything much besides the gameplay areas, nothing that interesting. But something fun did happen to me when I popped into an area and it didn't load in. I didn't come in contact with any geometry, but I did get stuck in this camera angle, which means you're over a infinite fall, a place where it'll arbitrarily kill you. So at first I was trying to figure out how to get out of this, and trying to see if there's any way. And one thing that's unfortunate is when it puts you in this camera angle, it's sort of an event, or I guess it's a flag, where it's like, nope, sorry, you're gonna die, you're gonna die. As soon as you fall, you're dead. And so it won't let you out of this. So I call it Baldur's Gate mode. And after a minute of messing around, I was like, you know what? I love Baldur's Gate. Take that, bees! Die! And I heard contact noises when I was at the right plane with them, but I don't think I was actually doing damage to them, or at least not enough to kill them, because I didn't manage to kill these guys. But, you know, I did. Hey, come on. Baldur's Gate. It was pretty fun. But after running around like this for a few minutes and being utterly silly about it, it was time to reload and go to the Dragon God boss area, which one of the most interesting things about this is comparing it to the one in the tutorial. So, in much the same way, it's arranged similarly. You come out of this structure that's multi-level, and there are two ballistas out front. Now this guy, he actually, in a similar way, you can't just hit him with your sword. You have to kill him through the event. Well, you can actually hit him with your sword in the head, if you want to. But you have to float over there at the level of his head and hit him right in the head, and he will take damage like he does at the end when you pin him down. But anyway, I decided to just, hey, with the power enabled to me by the debug menu, let's just kill him. Oh, and of course I grabbed the Dragon Bone Smasher for myself without the right world tendency, because I could just walk through the rocks. So boom, got him out of the way the sort of hard way, so that we can explore this room free of him blocking our view. Now coming over here, you know, it almost looks like this could be walkable floor over here, but it's not. It's just low detail texture, and it is a different formation. This, whatever this is over here, is different than the one in the tutorial area. So this is not a mirror, or they just, you know, took it and changed around some textures. Each are completely different from one another, and this is a different rock formation. Now, it also, people have speculated that this is a gate over here. It does kind of look like a gate, and it's possible that it's meant to represent one, but it's just a flat black texture back behind this doorway, and there isn't anything back there. I'll walk through it in a moment. The lava looks pretty cool, but as you can see, this rock formation doesn't at all resemble the statues and things that are in the tutorial level. Now, if I run through it, as soon as I go through the back wall, there's absolutely nothing. We're just empty skybox, and there's actually not even a skybox out here. But there is still the sun. The sun is in every section of the level, even if it's not rendering the skybox or anything anymore. But you can see that there's nothing back here. Latria gives us a lot as far as map information, because it's the only area in the game where we are left with items that describe areas inside the level as having a compass direction. Now, according to those items, the area where I start is the east side of the prison, and the opposite side is the west side. So that is what I base all of my directions on, that when I start out, to my right is the north, and to my left is the south. Now, interesting thing here is we can see right outside the prison that Latria is definitely supposed to be a walled city. It goes far enough in either direction that you can see it is a ring, which is, again, very important for us when identifying things on the map briefly shown in the intro cutscene. It just goes over here far enough that you can kind of see, once again, if a player turned the brightness all the way up and looked as far as they could from the corner of the gameplay area, it's meant to be convincing of what it's supposed to be. What it's supposed to be being key. Now, there are further prisons, like the one you explore, going around the ring of this city, which is kind of insane when you think about it, that the old monk built like a dozen of these things. And, I mean, everybody in the kingdom must be inside these things. But anyway, they are totally empty inside and mostly very low detail, but this is the one closest to you that you can see just a little bit from the gameplay area, and it has a few torches on the outside, and other than having a few more detailed textures, it's the same as the others, where it's completely empty inside with no detail. You can see there's one or two further ones in this direction, because you can see a little farther this way when playing. But when we go over here, again, no detail, nothing else going on inside it. It is pretty interesting how much detail was put into it, and you get really, I mean, I honestly, like, I hate to even say this because it's the internet and you can't go to Nazis, but I get kind of a crazy Nazi vibe from the old monk because of the just, you know, insane architecture, over the top ambitious projects, and, you know, being insane and sadistic. So you know, making all these prisons and imprisoning the whole kingdom. And, you know, conducting experiments on them. I mean, does anybody else get that? I think it's there. But anyway, this is going in, so I'm beneath the chunk that's loaded right now is the Chapel of the Fool's Idol. And the rest of this is all low detail of the valley in here in the center. So I'm running around just sort of looking at it because it's easier to see when all the clouds and objects and things are not in the way. And a few interesting things just looking around at the layout, but eventually I just needed to get it to actually load so I could see things in detail. So I hopped on this elevator, and once I stepped on some floor, we got it all to chunk in. This is how the entire game is. It loads it in these chunks, and it gets rid of immediately other sections that are around you. You can only load one and occasionally two at once. And other sections you see are created to be seen from here again. They're not the section you were actually just in. That immediately disappears, and you can see that occasionally in this video. I took some whacks at the heart. You know you want to. Didn't do anything interesting. Explored around in these buildings. This is the old Monk's Tower here. Now, it's just kind of interesting. The low detail model didn't have anything cool for me to look at. Really, there's just a section that you go into for the boss fight. But there's another tower over here that doesn't load in this chunk that I'll talk a little more about later. But I noticed that there are rivers. There are rivers flowing downhill inwards from what would be sort of the northwest, based on the compass directions I was using from the prison initially starting out. And there's sort of outflows that would go to, if the wall around that side of the city was rendered in this particular chunk, or I don't think it exists at all, there would be sort of outflow drains on the other side of the city. So just kind of based on random things that are mentioned in the lore in the game and speculations. So if both Boletaria and Latria flow out eventually into the Valley of Defilement, that's going to fit some other things with my theories. Now, interestingly over here, what these chains are connecting to and what's not visible. So I believe that one might actually be the tower that the demons pull you up in after the Fool's Idol battle. But there's another tower over here that there are chains connected to but is not visible, that has no explanation and is not very visible from anywhere in the game. And it is actually different. It's not just one of these random towers that's there to support things. But it's very hard to get it visible in its low detail, so I can only speculate about it. But anyway, running around and just sort of looking at this area around here to get an idea of the geography. So it's in kind of a ring valley, and the city itself is sort of a ring. Now I'm going over here, going back inside the prison, just to confirm my directions to make sure I hadn't completely lost it. And yep, I walked right back into the starting room. The Shrine of Storms doesn't give us a ton of interesting development information as far as stuff left on the cutting room floor, but it does give us a little bit as far as map geography. Now there are a few islands that are visible when you look at the map once again in the intro cutscene, and by figuring out the exact shape of this island, we can pretty well figure out which one of those it is. And so it's a little bit difficult to run around and get all the chunks to load in. But overall, you can go around this island and get the sense that it is in sort of a chili pepper shape. The peninsula that you fight the Storm King on at the end being sort of the bottom tip of the chili pepper. Now it took me a little bit to hop into this last chunk here, but I managed to get it where we fight the Storm King down below. And once that was loaded in, that gave me the most complete shape of the outside of the island. But as far as things cut from the game, there wasn't really much to see here. Everything fits pretty neatly where it's supposed to be. The segments of the level are either inside the island or on its surface, pretty much where they should be in relation to each other. There we go, it just finished fully loading in this section down here by the boss. Now I was just going to go about my business, but I don't know. I mean, it's a challenge. I'm a Souls fan. I was like, you know what, I have like a soul level 500 character. I'm just going to take him on. So, speed this up real quick. Maybe I should have sped this up a little more, but you know it. Come on. I mean, like I mentioned before, when I go near a boss battle, their health bar gets stuck on my screen, and it's just almost like a challenge I can't handle that they need to die. So anyway, took care of our little buddy here. But it gives me a full view of the island, and I ran around it a couple of times after this, and it definitely showed me its shape. The Valley of Defilement is another one that didn't have maybe as much stuff as I might have liked to see out of bounds. But one interesting thing, a lot of people have wondered, what is past the wall immediately where you start? So, you know, once again, just in case you peek through somehow, they put some kind of detail objects over here. Some walls and bridges that don't lead to anywhere, but they look cool just in case someone peeked through that wall and saw that it's like there is a little bit of lead up, like there is a way that someone could have walked into this valley. But other than that, there's not much to see out here besides that there is indeed a river that flows into the valley as is described in the game's lore. While I was here, I just wanted to kind of look around and see if there was much of anything out of bounds, but it's actually pretty tightly constructed here. Right down below me is the Leechmonger boss fight, which then this little path will lead into the next segment of the lower swamp area. And it will first load this boss battle area right when I drop in. And it's sort of just another goal while I was here, since it didn't look like I was going to find much. I was going to go and try to kill Estrella without even interacting with the other bosses and just see if that did anything weird. Interesting thing about this bandage is really cool because it makes you think that the entire level is all loaded in at once and it looks just massive, which the level is massive, but it's actually a trick. It's just some detail objects around these torches to give you the impression that everything is there, and then when you come in closer to the things, it actually loads in more terrain and stuff around it. So you'll see there's just a few things that are lit up by the halo of the torches, and then you'll see what it looks like if I actually come in close to one of these areas and land on it, and it loads the segment in. Right here is, well, I guess I'm right outside the Unclean One boss battle. My aim is pretty good in the dark, eh? The Dirty Colossus, sorry. I don't remember the proper names for these guys. There's a lot of bosses between all the Soulsborne games. But anyway, drop through the wall, got no time for you. Going into this horrible, horrible area. I'm sure everyone has fond memories of this. It's like, oh, hey, it's just a short little segment here at the end of this area. This'll be easy. So, sorry, old girl. Getting my revenge after all these years. Not even gonna get a chance. So excuse me once again as I cheap a boss using Debug to get revenge for all those cheap deaths I have suffered at their hands over the years. This is maybe not informative content, but I was just kind of curious if I would glitch it in some way by killing the Archdemon at the end of the level after just walking through the boss battle rooms of the other two. It didn't seem to actually give it much trouble. But, you know, it's not like I regretted giving it to these two. So there you go, nothing exciting. Archstone still pops up the way you would expect. And I just kind of popped in again with it unloaded to look around at the geometry outside and see if there's any suggestion that there could have been something beyond this level or outside of this area. Nope, didn't find anything, tried it a few times. The later areas seemed to be that way, where they had a pretty good idea of how they wanted to build the levels. The intro to the game is very interesting because it has some of the most evidence left over of a previous design philosophy of the game, when the layout of the world and some of the lore was less obscure and more overt. Now we get a little bit of the view of the area outside presumably what is Boletaria, but we also see a few other areas that are going to be interesting to us for our speculation. Finally, we get a brief view of a world map. It has no labels on it, the compass isn't even labeled with directions, but this has led to a lot of speculation. I almost forgot to mention, there are also detailed images of Boletaria and what is presumably the valley we can see in 1-2 from the Lord's Path, with the lake at the foot of the mountains, and that structure appears to be that church with the square in front of it that we can see. So without too much further ado, I want to get talking about my speculations on the map layout based on what I've explored. But I do just real quick want to give credit to Loki, noted Dark Souls archaeologist, I guess I should say, who participated with me in this discussion and is also working on a map that is going to be based on a much deeper understanding of lore that Loki has from years of projects. This is just my speculation based on me looking at these things in the game and trying to put things together. So although I'm proud of this map and the work that I've done on it, it is definitely a work in progress that's probably going to change already in part 2 of this video when I start looking at some of the other content on the disc that is not part of the gameplay area, like the 7th map, which many believe to be where the destroyed 6th Archstone would have taken you, as well as the developer test rooms, the things that are left on there. Now, taking a look at the map, I'm just going to go in sequence like I did in the main video. If we do assume that that was a bridge connecting the tutorial being on an island, there's only one location on this map that looks like that. Down here in this bay is an island that appears to have a bridge connecting it to land. So just speculatively, I've marked that as the location of the tutorial. Now, moving to the Boletarian Palace, there's this representation of a castle here along the river, and just based on it coming from this lake at the base of the mountains that to me resembles the lake in 1-2, that appears to have a river coming from it that goes around the corner of the mountain and then is the one going through the gate in front of the castle, it to me seems to match up. And so I have this marked as the Boletarian Palace, which also again matches based on the path that I speculate going into the mountains, going to Stonefang, and then going from Stonefang, the path backwards, going back to what looks like the walls of a city, or Boletaria, down in the valley. Now, I have Stonefang marked up here in this valley. So besides just what I've said before, there is this river that flows out of the mountains, forks at the far end of the valley, and also has this city next to it, just like we see within the game. Moving to the Tower of Latria, it would be kind of unusual to have a second compass rose on land when you already have one in the traditional location out in the sea. So I'm pretty sure that this is supposed to represent Latria, since it's a ringed city that seems to have these 8 towers around it with giant chains connecting through the middle. So that looks like what's being represented here. The only thing about it that's unusual is that it doesn't seem to actually have the river flowing through it, and there does seem to be water flowing in and out of the city, which could be entirely artificial and pulled from the river, but this doesn't seem to be straddling the river here. As far as the Shrine of Storms, there's only one roughly chili pepper looking island out here in the water, and this matches of it being far enough from shore that it's not visible in any direction. So this is over here is what I have marked as the Shrine of Storms. Now this is interesting for something that a lot of people have theorized about the game, is how there is described as sort of a barbarian or foreigner, depending on how you translate, a group of people that apparently settled on this Shrine of Storms and practiced strange arts and rituals, and may have also been the same people who then colonized this eastern shore over here. So just as speculatively, if that's the case, this island being here and then them moving and colonizing this eastern shore, moving over towards Stonefang, would fit with that theory, which I found very interesting. Finally here, the Valley of Defilement. Now I don't have much to base this on besides just the fact that the Valley of Defilement is referenced in lore as supposedly being the outflow from the other areas, so Boletaria and Latria, and if Latria is south of Boletaria and the river flows through both and then goes to this area with the windmills, I'm choosing to label that as the Valley of Defilement. The only thing I really have to base this on is just that there are objects that kind of look like windmills in the dark that are just sort of detail objects when you're there, and then just sort of a weird thing that the similar area in Dark Souls 2 has windmills in it, so it was almost like an idea they wanted to use but wasn't really visible there. So that's really all I have to go for on that being the Valley of Defilement. Now just if we take those and go with other directions given within the lore in the game, I've added some other speculative things like what could possibly be the regions referenced in the game, what this strange sort of Zelda Triforce looking thing down here could possibly be the seat of the church if it is in the west, in the Western Highlands. And finally, if this is some sort of port over here between the Shrine of Storms and Stonefang, where the river ends in this little bay that, well, you know, people would build a port there. So I've just thrown some other speculation up there. You can take this as you like, but if you do take my map, I would definitely appreciate it if people would at least credit me for my work. I definitely, you know, there's a lot for the community to digest here, and I imagine that there's going to be a lot further development from a lot of these things. But, you know, I just definitely appreciate it if you would not just take my maps and not credit me at all, because I did capture these from the game. I used an AI upscaler myself and then put this time in. So that would just be much appreciated. Also, check out Loki's upcoming map, and there are numerous other things that I'm going to link here of other people working in the Dark Souls community that also deserve to be credited for their contributions if you use any of their stuff for your own exploration. So thank you. That's it on my speculative map for now. More coming in part 2. I hope you folks enjoyed that a lot. It was a huge undertaking for me to make this video, even as amateurish as it may have seemed in a lot of ways compared to some of the other stuff like this you've seen. But for me, I'm still just learning, and even when it comes to using these modding tools, I'd never done any of this stuff before. I'd actually never used RPCS3 before I started doing this with Demon Souls, and then I just, you know, most of the things that were originally done on modded PS3s were pretty easy to adapt over to the emulator. And I managed to get it working pretty quickly, and it wasn't too difficult. But I hope to continue improving throughout this series, both in the quality of my videos and in the tools I'm able to use to explore the areas. I have to apologize just briefly. It is possible for me to disable more UI elements, get rid of enemies, do things like that, but unfortunately it has to be redone through the debug menu every single time you reload. So every time I freeze, crash, die, load a different area, I would have to go through the list and redo everything again. So just in the interest of not driving myself insane with the tedium, I mostly just turned off gravity and went out of bounds to capture this footage. Occasionally I also came too close to boss battles, and then their health bars would stay stuck on my screen. So it does degrade a little bit the ability for you to see with, you know, absolute clarity what I'm trying to display. I'll try to get better about that in the future, but just in the interest of my time and sanity, that was something that I had to live with in this, just so I could just go boom, 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 and get to exploring, because it did take, that was about 8 to 9 hours of gameplay that went into that. In the between the first and second parts here, I'm going to do a little bonus stream where I load every single model in the game in the model viewer and test out their different animations and physics and things like that. And it shows you a lot of interesting things about how the game was made. Then finally, part 2, I'm going to be loading up as much as I can of the Northern Limit area, which most people believe is where the 6th Archstone would have taken you. And hopefully, I have seen people load more than just the level geometry, so it'd be nice to, if there was even a way I could put some of the enemy models that you can find on the disc in there somehow, or any of that stuff. But I have a lot to catch up on what everybody's done, and we'll see if you know, I can save a lot of time where someone's just made it easy for me and I can just kind of copy and paste, or if I have to pretty much go through and relearn everything that everyone else has done. But I'm going to get that fully working. I wasn't able to access the old one area once again through the debug menu. I tried through numerous ways, including maximum effort, and it crashed every time. So I would really like to do that for part 2. And then finally, there are a whole bunch of developer test rooms, including test versions of the tutorial rooms that show a lot more about how the game was developed. And I can't wait to dive into those, but it's going to be another whole video, and it's going to take me a bit of digging and poking and messing around with stuff to get it all working. So stay tuned. In between, at some point in the near future, I am going to be doing that stream where I load up every single model in Demon Souls and we test them all out. So yeah, coming soon.